Good morning, everybody. It's great to be back at GreenBiz. It certainly has exploded in size since I was last here about 5 years ago. So congratulations to Joel, Eric, Pete, the whole crew, and to all of you for coming. I want to bring out now Daniel Lee. Come on out, Daniel, and introduce him. We're going to talk about corporate philanthropy. So a few words about Daniel, a few words about the Levi Strauss Foundation. Daniel grew up in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. He's a graduate of Princeton and the Harvard Divinity School. He did not go on to become a minister. Instead, he worked in nonprofits, mostly serving the LGBT community in Boston and in San Francisco. He's been with the Levi Strauss Foundation for 16 years and has led it since 2008. Am I right about that? And of course, Levi Strauss is probably one of the oldest, certainly one of the oldest companies, if not the oldest company here. It has been around since the 1850s. It's known not only for its jeans, but for being a pioneer, really, in the area of corporate responsibility, desegregating factories in the South prior to the civil rights laws, and being the first company to adopt a code of conduct for its entire supply chain that's now 30 years old. The foundation, like the company, is a pioneer. It stands out in the relatively staid world of corporate philanthropy. Just this month or last month, Inside Philanthropy, which is the publication that does for the world of philanthropy what GreenBiz does for corporate sustainability, said the Strauss Foundation is the best corporate donor, was the best corporate donor in 2019, and the citation said, and this is quite right, while most corporate foundations align philanthropy with business interests, the Levi Strauss Foundation focuses on marginalization and how it can do the most good by supporting LGBTQ communities and workers' rights. So Daniel, let's start with a why question. Most corporate philanthropy goes to very traditional conservative causes. Education, you hear a lot about STEM, healthcare, some community development, a little bit of the arts, less environment than you might think. But why did Levi Strauss take the path that you have taken with the foundation?
Well, thank you for the warm welcome and greetings to the GreenBiz community. It's an honor to be on stage here with Marc Gunther, who's a towering voice in sustainability. He's recently moved over into the field of philanthropy, and he's been a provocative voice, I think, piercing a veneer that can be overly polite, and it's welcome. When it comes to that question, I think I can answer it in three ways: at the level of values, at the level of legacy, and the level of icons. First of all, I went to divinity school. I didn't get ordained, but being at Levi Strauss has been a master class in the value of values. And as a values-driven institution, we embrace four of them. They're originality, empathy, integrity, and courage. And these guide everything we do in the business as well as our giving. And guided by these, we really strive as a foundation to be an ally and an advocate for society's most marginal. And we also believe in something I think that's an underrated virtue in the field of philanthropy, and especially corporate philanthropy, which is patience. If I'm able to get on a pedestal for a second, I think, I went to an AIDS conference a long time ago. I cut my teeth in that movement, and someone made the comment, be careful about what bandwagons you jump on. And we've seen those Harvard Business Review diagrams of all the jargon that makes its way through the field: collaboration, partnerships, and innovation. The gospel of innovation is one that we're all under, and it has a lot of merits. But one of the unexpected, I think, undersides is it privileges what is new and disruptive over what is tried and true. And we have operated over decades in three lanes in service of serving marginalized groups. Addressing the HIV/AIDS epidemic, we were the first company to address that, and the first corporate foundation, even before it had a name. And we wonder if this is business interest. It's not traditional, but it's about standing beside our employees and staying with that commitment, and it became a model for other corporations along the way.
And you're still involved with HIV/AIDS, which really faded from the headlines probably at least 10 years ago, if not longer.
really proud as a corporate foundation to be in the fight against HIV/AIDS for 36 years now, $75 million. Yeah, and stigma and discrimination are affront to our values. It is also very ineffective when it comes to ending the HIV/AIDS epidemic. So that's one area. The second is in advancing the rights and the well-being of apparel workers, the people who make our products. And the third area is social justice. And we've had a long history of supporting social justice causes and leaders of foundations. The second area is, when it comes to why we do this, is legacy. I'm a student of history too, in addition to theology, and a 167-year-old company. And the high water marks, I think, have been when the leaders, the family shareholders, are still privately held largely, and the employees have put the voice, the influence, and everything on the line in service of these values. It was the first company. It was the first company to adopt a code of conduct in 1991 for supply chains. In the 1950s, actually in the 40s, it started desegregating factories in California and in the American South long before it was legally mandated. And also around the LGBT community was the first company that provided domestic partner benefits. So we feel in the foundation, we have a staff of 7, we donate about $10 million per year. We stand on the shoulders of these giants and hope that through our actions and words can have influence.
And where does the money each year that you give away come from? Is it essentially allocated by Levi Strauss itself?
Yes. So
the board of the company.
We have at Levi Strauss & Company, we have a sort of a mantra called Profits Through Principles. And the mission of the company is that we deliver profits through principles to have an outsized impact on the world. And we really see our foundation's work as core to that. So over the last 50 years, we've averaged around 2% of profits. I know many corporate foundations are aspiring towards 1%. I think the average across the industry is about 0.86%.
And so how do you justify to a shareholder of the company, you became a public company just last year,
yes,
giving money to LGBT advocacy groups or for that matter, groups that advocate for workers in India or in Cambodia or in Bangladesh? Since it is, in a sense, shareholder money, what's the business case, or does there not need to be a business case at this point?
It's a both and, but I would say I'm asked this question in corporate responsibility, corporate philanthropy conferences all along. And I think the conventional wisdom would say, oh, it's because you're a privately held company that you're able to swing and take these risks, as it were. We call them courageous risks. Our company went partially public about a year ago, and it was, our CEO, Chip Bergh, was really clear. He spoke to investors and said time and again who we are as a company that aims for impact in the world. And that means we're going to weigh in on the issues that we care about. We're going to use our voice, our influence. We're going to activate our employees and invest in community in aligned causes. We will not change who we are. And he actually went so far as to say, if you don't like what we're saying or what our voice is, then we don't want you to invest in us. And he said, we will continue to be outspoken and as active as we always are. And we've had 2 of our best years in the past 30, and it's probably maybe not coincidental. It's been a very juicy time in terms of the social impact we've been able to drive too, because these are turbulent times.
So you and I were both at the panel yesterday talking about brands taking stands, essentially.
Yeah,
and it has been really interesting to see in the last 2-3 years, really probably since the Trump election, companies standing up around issues like LGBTQ rights, gun violence, gun control to some extent, immigration as well. And so Levi Strauss has been part of that, but you've gone, again, a step beyond, not just to say we support, we don't like this draconian law in Indiana, or we don't like the bathroom bill in North Carolina, but we are going to fund some of the grassroots organizations that are fighting against those measures. Have you found corporate allies? Have you asked other companies to say, help us in supporting immigrants' rights groups or LGBT rights groups?
Well, I would say the 2016 presidential election was a critical moment. And this is the most disruptive political environment that in our lifetimes. And I think disruption calls for asking questions. Do you stop what you're doing?
I thought disruption was a good thing.
It's a good thing. No, it's a good thing. But these are moments of truth and pressure testing moments for values. And we ask that question, do we stop what we're doing? Do we start doing new things, or we do more of what we're doing? And I actually want to go back to that 2016 presidential election, because it was a critical moment where, many of us were surprised by that, by the result. And I was incredibly hungover 2 days after at a town hall meeting. Okay. And Chip Berg, our CEO, had a town hall meeting, and he calls it Chips and Beer, and you can ask him any question. And inevitably, the question of the results of the election came up. He was unequivocal, and he said, now more than ever, this is the time to show the country and to show the world what it means to be a values-driven institution. And he said, originality, empathy, integrity, and courage. Empathy and courage are in short supply. And if this is the time for us to step up and show who we are, let's do it. He also pointed out that there are hard-fought gains in diversity and inclusion that stand to be, that are under threat here. We had a foundation board meeting, our foundation, 2 days later, and Chip actually called upon us to say, I want a special meeting of our foundation, one month into this administration, and I want to know if the candidate versus number 45, the administration, is A, not as bad as we thought, it was a lot of bluster, B, bad, or C, horrendous. And I want to separate conjecture from fact. So our team really looked at what was happening. We saw the executive orders with a different lens, and we realized that so many of the communities that we've long cared about as a company and that we've stood beside are facing threats at the hands of the policies of our own institutions. So we adopted out of that meeting, February 7th, 2017, right. Math is hard, what we called a rapid response fund, which was $1 million to protect groups that are facing, that are in the crosshairs of the policy environment. Muslims, South Asians, refugees, immigrants, and members of the trans community.
And so, thank you.
And about 20% went to the global refugee crisis. And we have renewed this. We're now in the 4th year. So it's not a rapid response fund. We call it our strategic response fund. It is not a rainy day, but a sustained monsoon for these communities. And on the level of values.
So how do you give a concrete example or two of how you spent that $1 million? Give us a couple of groups that you supported and what they do.
So we have long, supported the LGBT community, and we asked Chris Hayashi, the head of the Transgender Law Center, a national organization based in the Bay Area, what are they seeing? And it was really an important time to ask. And the Transgender Law Center did a whole slate of legal aid clinics around the country right after the elections and found that there was astonishing demand for legal aid, legal services. People were afraid of being re-victimized potentially because the Affordable Care Act would be pulled from the rug, and overwhelming demand for identity card changes so that their identity cards match their gender, and also to have expungements of police records because many trans people face abuse at the hands of police. We provided a grant to the Transgender Law Center to provide legal services as they're needed. And many of us know that after marriage equality in 2015, there have been 600 plus anti-LGBT bills all across the country. And they've been largely these pernicious bathroom bills affecting trans people, or invalidating anti-discrimination provisions, or religious exemption laws. And it's trans people all across the country that have borne the brunt. So they're training another generation of leaders, especially in the South and the West. Another example would be organizations like United We Dream, which works with the courageous dreamers. And there's an organization called Define American, led by Jose Antonio Vargas. Right. And they're doing incredible work around cultural change, and realize that we need, as a country, to intervene at the level of values. And they had the prescience to actually open a production studio with 2 people in Los Angeles, and they're working with showrunners of TV shows, and they've worked with 45 of these. I'm one of the few people who's watching season 16 of Grey's Anatomy. Anyone else? You're in the dark, you can raise your hands. No, but they socialize and they work to get stories of dreamers dispelling misconceptions that you can stand in a line and humanizing folks. So, we believe as a brand, we're best at the center of culture, and it's just been amazing to see that these grantees are standing for culture, and they're changing it in ways that punch far beyond a $100,000 grant that we give them. And also, wanted to say that as American icon, what we say about America matters. And we want to take a stand for an inclusive America. And societies, these are really dark times, and we can't sit here in a sustainability conference and talk about materials till we're blue in the face.
Right.
Societies are facing two diversion paths. I think there's two diversion paths, and the disparities are incredible between them. And one is we take those who are already marginal, take those who are already stigmatized in society, we vilify, we separate, we segregate, we blame. That's one part of the playbook. The other one is that we build our democracy around protection of those who are most marginal. Yeah. We're opting for that vision of America, and it's important if the corporate sector is not using our voice, our influence, there is not a time to stand out, or to stand by as a bystander. And you went to that question of how corporations are using their voice. We're seeing a sea change in the past 3 years, I think.
In terms of speaking up, but I think one thing people in this room might want to know is, Levi Strauss is an unusual company. There's the long history. There's a vegan CEO. Chip is not your typical CEO of a big company. For people who work for, let's say, more conventional companies with more conventional CEOs, how can they go to their corporate foundations or even their sustainability people and say, let's talk a little more broadly about sustainability. Let's talk about how it means sustaining even the least among us in America. What's the message that might be effective in a more conventional company?
Well, I think this idea of standing beside the communities that we care about, and that a healthy company cannot exist in a healthy environment. And when there are forces at work that are preying on those who are most weak and vulnerable, it's a time to step up. It doesn't need to be a stance, in terms of an amicus brief or in terms of a marketing campaign. It can be actually getting to know folks in the community and volunteering with the community and supporting communities who are vulnerable. I think so much of what's needed in this world where inequality, the business sector can't sit that one out either, is that our sectors need to speak with one another. And I think our foundation serves as a hub, as a bridge we believe for leaders of social movements, for folks who are leaders of nonprofits in San Francisco, where there's so much mounting inequality, to bring these worlds together. And it can start with rolling up sleeves, volunteering. It can start with asking what you need as a social movement. I think from a value stance, there's so many places to stand, and we sort of have this idea of Levi's U. There's people who sit in public policy. There are people who sit in sustainability. People who sit in communications. People who sit in our foundation. We all have a place to stand in living our values. And it's everyone's work. And it's this work of influencing. We have to be crafty and nimble. I see us as advocates.
So one other program I want to ask you about, and then we'll take a question from Twitter. Give us a quick summary of what Pioneers in Justice is, because that's another area where I think Levi stands quite distinctly apart from conventional corporate giving.
Yeah, well, we were founded by a pioneer, and it really suits us to be supporting and really branding the folks that we serve as pioneers, and they certainly are. We have an initiative called Pioneers in Justice that works with groups of 5 to 7 next-gen leaders of civil rights and social justice organizations in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is a fountain of innovation. We work with them for 5 years at a time. We want to ask them, what do you need to take your work, your movements, your networks, and your organizations to the next level? And we're now in our second cohort, and they've generally, I think the work is centered around on using technology for good. It's centered on how to work in a networked, collaborative way to get to advance social justice. And third, how to develop your leadership voice to cut across sectors, to cut across movements. for us, it's a really great match.
So much more than grant making then.
Much more than grant making. I'll say a lot of folks, we have corporate people and family shareholders on our board. And for a long time, I think there were some folks who were scratching their heads saying, I don't know the measurable goals, the objectives of this initiative and what social justice is all about. Then 2016 election happened. And in many ways, we realized we were able to say by supporting these social justice leaders who are first movers when bad things happen, they're allies to communities, they're evangelists of values, we bought an insurance policy. And we actually, through this rapid response fund, doubled down support. And in many ways, it was a way it was a great opportunity to show the value that these social justice leaders bring to society and to our work. And it's been an opportunity to bring them into our boardroom and at our foundation, to bring the worlds together. We've had the Transgender Law Center actually advise our trans inclusion policy, and our company actually marched with that organization at San Francisco Pride. The very first time a company and a nonprofit ever marched together, which is surprising to me. But this is how we're all called upon, actually, to bring the worlds together.
Heather, do you have
Sarah.
one for us? Sarah. Sorry.
Yes, thank you so much for this talk. Everybody is looking through Twitter. People are just so inspired by what you stand for and how you really represent a company that's living the values. And also, it seems that you've elevated Levi jeans as appropriate wear for conference speakers now. So people
Me
are
too.
also thankful for that too. Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing that I wanted to ask you about, a lot of the policy work that you have, a lot of the policy work that you've mentioned you've been involved in is in that social justice realm, which is obviously incredibly important and a place where companies can really be leveraging their power. But people are also interested in the responsibilities that corporations have to be involved with policy that impacts sustainability that may have implications for how the company is actually operating and what the bottom lines may be for a company. So is there some sort of responsibility for that collective pre-competitive action for companies?
Absolutely. And some of you went to the session yesterday on corporate advocacy, and my colleague Anna Walker, who leads our public affairs, is just an incredible advocate and ally. And that function, I think, we see our role at Levi Strauss sometimes as expanding and defying conventional notions of business interest. And Anna, for over a decade, has been actually, working to ensure that, for example, that trade agreements include measures that advance sustainability and advance the rights of workers. And that's work that happens behind the scenes. We have a lot of folks I know who are part of the Series network here. And Levi Strauss and Company was a founder of the BICEP network. Do you know what BICEP stands for? I should know, but it's all about ensuring that the business conversation around carbon and climate is not dominated by extractive industries. That we do our part to create science-based targets and walk our talk there. So that advocacy is really key. And within the apparel industry, I mean, many folks here know that it was 1991 that Levi Strauss & Company was the first to adopt a code of conduct. And that was at a time when our company was going into China. And folks in the company who were creating that were seen as loonies. And I think many of our competitors thought they're going to lose out on cost and competitive positioning. But it ended up being the right thing to do. We are also, at the 20th anniversary of that, realized that codes of conduct were an important starting point. But not enough. And we're continuing to raise the bar through our sustainability practices, and our foundation plays a big role in that. We have a session after lunch on that. But I think a bit on the soapbox that I think the sustainability field can be very materialistic. We talk so much about water, carbon, energy, but about people and ensuring that the people who make our products, their lives are improved and their lives are sustainable. The Worker Wellbeing Initiative is something that we're collaborating with other brands with, and the Harvard School of Public Health, the SHINE Initiative, to see that to really ensure, first of all, that worker empowerment programs are a way of doing business and not just an add-on.
We got to stop.
Oh, gotta stop. Got it. Okay.
But
Apologies.
This whole issue of worker well-being is fascinating. It's going to be one of the topics we deal with at 1:30. It's actually an area where there has not been as much success, I think, either at Levi's or other companies in the apparel industry. We're going to be honest about that. We're also going to hear from Freeport McMoran, Tracy Bain Abernathy, and International Paper, Alyssa Campbell Shaw. It's going to be a workshop, very interactive, very informal. So if you want to hear more from Daniel or hear about how those other companies are doing philanthropy, please join us at 1:30. And thank you very much for your attention.